Let's see what happens. All right, everybody. This is the penultimate session. Last week was the anti-penultimate session. This is the penultimate. Next week is the ultima, the last one. The last one. That's Greek accentuation marks. Remember those?
Yes, I do.
And the anti-penultimals. So anyway, we finally get to the book of Deuteronomy. There's 5 books. We took Genesis in 3. We took Leviticus in 1. So we have 2 weeks left on Deuteronomy. Anybody know what Deuteronomy means?
Second law.
Give me a second.
Well, you have half of it correct already because it's the second law. It's the second time the law is given. Which law? The 10 words. They're in Exodus 20 and in Deuteronomy chapter 5.
Oh, you're right.
I'm right. I was really worried. Oh, I feel better now. I really feel better.
Do you think we're learning?
No comment.
I'm trying.
Coffee's nice and warm.
Thank
I
you.
certainly hope so.
Yes.
And that's one of the things I'm going to ask about is what are we learning, if anything. So anyway, so Deuteronomy, the second time that the Torah, the books of Moses, are given, excuse me, the 3 major themes that we're going to have here is, first of all, the historical background. I'm going to come back to all of these. And then instruction, and then blessings and curses. Now, we're actually going to do Deuteronomy 1 to 11 and 29 to 34 as well. So we'll come back to some of these. Looking at the Deuteronomy 1 to 4, this is the kind of the quickie version. Some people have talked about that Deuteronomy is put together like a treaty pattern from the 2nd millennium BC. Like from between 1500 and 1200 before Christ, there were some treaty patterns. We'll get to all of this. Then there's a whole bit of description of the trek that they went through. And then the encouragement, remember and don't forget. 5 to 11 is an awful lot about the general motivation of obeying, being part of this covenant relationship. And then 12 to 26 are very specific ordinances. That we're going to look at next week, along with 27 and 28 with what are called both blessings and curses. And then today we're going to finish with the last part of it, Deuteronomy 29 to 34, which is going to have both a song and a blessing of Moses, the death of Moses, the reminder about the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, having said that, let's think now about an organizational structure. When scholars have been able to examine the treaties that were made in the ancient world, think of a treaty kind of like a marriage contract. All right, when people got married in earlier times, they say, you either marry for love or money. When you marry for love, you don't need much of a contract because you're dead broke, you don't have anything anyway. When you marry for money, you may have to kind of figure out, okay, how are we going to structure all of what we have? So, for example, we have people who talk about prenuptial agreements. And it may be different if a person marries after their spouse has died and they marry a second time, and then how do you take care of what possessions you had? Does it go for the second wife? Does it go for the children, or how is that going to be handled? So there may be some legal kinds of things. Or in times even in the Middle Ages and a lot of parts of the world today, it will be two families that are joining that agree we will be one with one another, or we will be together, we'll support each other, we'll help each other in times of need. In the time period from about 1500 to about 1200 before Christ, there are treaties between nations that have been discovered in archaeological digs. And there are a variety of different things that they see in those. But first of all, you'll have a preamble. Ambulate means to walk. So a preamble says, here's where we're going to walk. In Deuteronomy, that's just the very first few verses. These are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel beyond the Jordan, in the wilderness, on the plain opposite Suf, between Paran and Tophel, Laban, Hazerot, and Di-Zahav. By the way of Mount Seir, it takes 11 days to reach Kadesh Barnea from Horeb. In the 40th year, on the first day of the 11th month, Moses spoke to the Israelites just as the Lord had commanded him to speak to them. This was after he had defeated King Sihon of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon, and King Og of Bashan, who reigned in Ashtarot and in Edrei. Beyond the Jordan, in the land of Moab, Moses undertook to expound this law as follows. So, chapter 1, verses 1 to 5, it sort of sets the stage. It's going to give us some historical detail there already. If we were going to do this with a treaty with another nation, we would talk about, okay, where are we meeting, what are we doing, and how are we getting going with this. The next stage is a very important one. It's called the historical prologue. How did we get to here? Now, can you remember for me, what was the historical prologue in Exodus 20, verse 1 and 2, or whatever? Don't look.
20 verses. Oh, didn't he talk about how he had taken them out of Egypt?
I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage.
Yeah,
And period. And then you shall have... I don't even think it says that. I just think it says, now therefore you shall have no other gods, shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, and things like that. So very quickly, it says, here's what I did for you. How far back do we have to go to get to the beginning of that story? To get to the beginning of that story.
The story of Joseph. when they came.
Have to go earlier than that. Now that's how they got down into Egypt. How far back do we have to go?
The garden?
No?
No?
Abraham?
To Abraham.
Oh, to Abraham.
Okay? We go to Genesis chapter 12. Leave your country, your father's house, go to the land that I will show you. I'll make of you a great nation. I'll bless those who bless you. I'll curse those who curse you. And in you all the families of the earth will be blessed. And Abram went. So God comes to Abraham. And there are a lot of people who will look at a different kind of a relationship between God and Abraham versus this, where there are responsibilities. But were there responsibilities for Abraham? Yes, go. Go from the land that you're living in now to another land. And he went. Everything else is sort of like commentary on it. So he goes from southern Iraq, and then his family is up in Syria, and then in Damascus, and then finally he comes down into the land that was the land of the Canaanites and all of those other people at that point that now we know as the land of Israel. So everything else from there on is, how are you going to keep the promise that you have made to them, God? So this is really, God is telling his side of the story. That's what the Bible is. God says, here's what I did, here's how it turned out. Here's how they acted. Some were faithful, some were faithless, but it's within that framework. Now, when we get to Deuteronomy here, we get to what happened from the time that God had come to deliver them from Egypt, what happened in those intervening, how many years?
40.
Roughly 40.
What, 38? 40?
Yeah. So during that time, what happened during that time to bring them further? How did they get to this place now? And so essentially the caption over that would be, here's how I got you here. In spite of the rebellion, in spite of the revolt, in spite of the harsh conditions in the wilderness, here's how you got to be right here, right now, right here at the Jordan, ready to pop over across the Jordan to go into the land. Just for historical purposes, think of what's going on. We have the people of Esau. The Edomites are over in this area. The Moabites are over here. The Ammonites are up here. We also have Og and Og, the king of Bashan, and what's his name? Sihon, the king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, where they get defeated. But the Philistines are kind of moving in here from the islands of the Mediterranean and from Greece, bringing with them the ability to use iron in their farm technology. In other words, at the beginning here it says there was a whole big shuffling around of who lives here. Now, the biblical text is going to say God saw the wickedness of the people who lived in that land, and he says, I want them removed. We're going to see this in Joshua and Judges in the spring as well, and it's going to be just as irritating for a lot of people that somebody is going to move in. So God says, now don't take away their land because I'm letting them have this. So the sons of Lot, the Ammonites and the Moabites, and the sons of Esau, the Edomites, they're east of the Jordan, and southwest are the Philistines, who have no contact with anybody at this point. But God says, I'm letting them move in. We have all been surprised if we have watched the news at what is happening with this Muslim state, this caliphate that is being set up in northern Iraq and western Syria. And we think, that's a terrible, terrible thing. We have to stop that. That's exactly what Israel was doing. They were moving into somebody else's land and killing them all off. And their God told them to do it. And you have to wonder today, what about all those nations round about? Did they call Washington up and say, would you please come and bomb all these people and get them out of here? Here it says God is giving them the chance to do that. Now, from inside the story, not outside, but from inside the story, we have God saying, these people are wicked. I will compare it to, number one, God cleansing the garden by throwing Adam and Eve out. Then, the flood, which destroys almost everybody because they're wicked. And then God says, I'm not going to do that one again. Not with a flood. Then, Sodom and Gomorrah, where the fire and brimstone actually comes up from that earthquake fault that runs all the way down into East Africa. And there you have some sort of a violent eruption that destroys those cities. Now God says, I want you people to be the flood. Now, if there are nations from farther away that you conquer, let them be. Kill their warriors, but leave the rest of them. Inside the land, I want you to destroy everybody. I want you to get rid of the wickedness because they will draw you away from the faith. Now, that's not from inside, okay. But when we stand back, I can understand why people would say, well, I don't think that's a very nice part of the Bible. And in fact, I have commentaries that are kind of infuriating to me because instead of saying, here's the favorable view toward it, here's how we would see it within the story of God and his relation with humanity, people who take the Bible as a moral book just want to chop this stuff out. I'm going to get rid of this altogether. Don't even look at that. Anything that sounds immoral, don't look at that part. So I've heard people say the Old Testament is all war and gore. Who cares about that? Right? So if we want to push it, and we want to say that this book is about morality, we're going to have some trouble. If we say this is about the Creator who says it's my world and here's how I'm going to have it work, and I'm not going to allow wicked things to go on forever, filthy things that worship other gods and do all sorts of bad stuff. See, we don't know the Canaanites, but God says to the patriarchs, they're going to be eventually 400 years they're going to be able to be there until their sin reaches its fulfillment. And there are other places that talk about that God is patient, but some time or another sin reaches its fulfillment. It's full in the jar, and God says, okay, now it's gone. You've got to wonder, well, were they being given, quote, chances along the way? The text doesn't go into that. But you've got the names for a whole bunch of different groups that are known as the giants, the Amim, the Zamzumim, the Anavim, and the Rephaim, and there are all sorts of those who lived there beforehand, and this says they're going to be removed. We've got the prelude to this, that the people of Israel built the golden calf, and that all the leaders, or most of the leaders, I should say, didn't want to go up in the land because they didn't think they could take it. And so Moses says it's not because you're really on your best behavior and you did everything right. God is doing this out of His grace in spite of who you are and what you have done. You're getting this by grace, not by works. So the historical prologue then is going to be the description of how God brought them through. Then we actually have two chunks of what we would call instructions. This would be, how are we going to live within this covenant relationship? Here's what I obligate myself to do. Here's what I obligate you to do within that relationship. So, if you look at it, a lot of this is not as specific about how to settle court cases. You'll get a few things where, well, if this happens or if this happens, but a lot of it is just what's inappropriate within this relationship. So I will say things to those who are going to get married like, it is never appropriate that dishes go flying across the room. So a variety of things where you say, this just doesn't fit the picture at all. It's not, well, a little bit of this and a little too much here. Some things don't fit at all. And so a lot of the things that we're going to see in Deuteronomy are things like that. This plain doesn't fit in the picture of this relationship that I am establishing with you. Now, the instruction part, some of it we're going to look at today, some of it we're going to look at next week as we wrap up the Torah. Then it's followed by a variety of other things. Blessings and curses come in there. What will happen, and I'm going to be very careful with the way I say this, what will happen if we continue in the relationship? What will happen if we break it? All right? It's not that they're choosing to get into it and that their behavior will allow them to get in. The relationship has already been there. This is just how is it going to unfold. And so as we look at that, then how will it continue? The blessings and the curses. And then you will have a place to deposit it. So first of all, the preamble, then the historical prologue, then the stipulations, how is it all going to work, then the blessings if it continues, here's how it'll go, the curses if they turn against it. The fifth major part of these treaties was the deposit. Where are they going to put it? So Moses talks about putting the 10 words in a box called the Ark, and then a provision for public reading. And so they're to assemble at Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. They're to hear what the blessings are, to hear what the curses are. And every 7 years, they're to hear this all over and over again. how do we in our country, where do we most exercise our role as citizens? When we vote. When we vote. So every 4th year, we vote for a president. And then every 6th year for senators, every 2 years for congressmen, and then, governors and all that different states do different ways. So that's when we most exercise our role, and people will think about, okay, now who's running the government, and we all of a sudden hear names that most of us never hear any other time about who the senators are in various states and the governors and all those kind of things. But it's our exercising, this is who we are. I'm kind of sad that we don't have anything for citizens to kind of publicly say, I'm a citizen, except that. If you come from another country, at some point you go before a judge and you are sworn in as a citizen. But we have nothing like that. I mean, we could say, okay, Pledge of Allegiance that we do in school or something, but there's never anything official. It'd be kind of neat if when someone was 18 years old, they went before a judge to say, now I'm a grown-up, and the judge says, okay, now you can start doing your voting. You can exercise the role, and to explain a little bit about what it is to be a citizen. We have classes for that, so pretty much everybody who goes through high school has to take a government class where we learn about all the different ways in which the different parts of our country are organized, and at least some of the basic kinds of things. But here, every once in a while they would gather together and they would publicly hear all the stipulations. It'd be interesting if we would, every 4 years, stand up and before we did any voting, if somebody would read the Constitution out loud, and you'd all have to listen to it. People would complain if it was more than 2 sentences. No, I don't need to hear all that stuff. The closest alternative that I know of to it, or the closest other thing, is when we get our driver's licenses renewed. But even there, you don't have to take a test anymore. I think you should take the test every 4 years. In your case, every 2. And if any of you have taken that over 50 class, I have taken that many times, and I'm grumpy about it every time I take it. Because mostly what I hear is the teacher saying how bad other drivers are. How great we are and how bad other drivers are. Maybe once in a while a little bit about maybe I ought to watch this or watch that. I'd like them to review the laws. Teach me again. Here are the basic things. Remember this, remember that. How you turn, what lane you turn into, and a variety of things like that. That's what they would have been doing back here. All right? So, this is kind of the pattern of the way Deuteronomy is laid out, like a treaty. Okay? But a treaty is not the same as today when we would say we choose our mate. We decide we are going to get married. It's much in the ancient world, it was 2 families that were joining together, and families would make decisions. And we have that in various cultures today. I was at a Muslim wedding for a Pakistani young lady back, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years ago now. And she did not have permission to talk to her future husband on the phone without somebody in the room until she actually got the diamond ring. To even talk to them. And there was another young lady, there were three young ladies at the same table in my intro to Bible class. Here she is, and she couldn't even talk to the guy. There was another young lady from another culture who was pregnant and went down during the class to get married down somewhere in the South, Alabama or Mississippi or something like that. And the third one, she and her boyfriend, I went to that wedding too, they were living together. And I thought, here's one, can't even talk on the phone, and here's another one who's already pregnant, another one is living together. Very, very different experiences. that are going on among various cultures, and we all recognize the change from 3 generations ago in our country as well. Things are just seen as very different. So it's hard for us to think that families might decide who's going to get married and who's not. The closest we come to it is usually if we have a daughter, the husband-to-be will come and ask whether it's okay to marry her. That happens sometimes, I guess, still. Sometimes probably not either. But to realize this is a relational kind of a thing. So that framework is one that they were used to in their society. And if there are problems that are going to come, then the consequence will come upon that. You might remember there is a similar kind of thing with God and Abraham in Genesis 15, where the animals are cut in two and the fiery pot goes flying through. There, God is obligating himself. He says, you can trust me. I'm going to keep my promise. I'll take care of you. But really, everything in the whole Bible, after Genesis 3, is God saying, I'm going to continue to care for you even though you don't deserve it. But it's very kind of selfish in that it talks much more about God and Israel in the Bible than about God and all the other nations who are also his creatures. It's not like God just loves a few people and the rest of them he doesn't care about. They're all his. And that's our problem. And God says, live with it. Okay? And a lot of people will say, what about all those people that didn't ever get a chance to hear about the story? To which my answer is, don't make any more of them. The people you know who need to hear it, you make sure they hear it. Let God worry about the rest of it. Don't say, well, I think that's unfair of God, so I'm not going to tell anybody either. And what about the thing of, well, let's not say anything, because if we don't say anything, maybe eternity in hell won't be so bad for them as it would be if we told them and they said no. So let's not do any evangelism. We might make it worse for them. They'll be deeper in hell. Well, I don't find that in the Bible either. So I can make God up in my own image to the point that I say, I don't like that kind of God. And very often when we're bothered by something in the Bible, what we're bothered by is our view of God is getting attacked. What we think God is getting attacked. And who he really is, which he reveals here, we don't like. I don't believe in a God who causes suffering. Well, I don't happen to either. But does God permit it? Does he allow it? Certainly seems like it. So either I trade him in for a different God, which is no God, or I live with what has he revealed to me about the fact that there is salvation, and in all eternity he wants us to be with him. So I can stand on the outside and I can take pot shots at all this, or I can say from inside, what does it say about who he is? Does God say, I want to be mean to you? No. He said, I want to love you, I want to care for you, I want to provide for you. And so the picture of the land of Israel, the promised land, is really the picture of a temporary Garden of Eden. It's not the whole shot, but it's temporary. I will protect you. I will put a circle around you so that there's no gate that I'm going to kick you out of. I'm going to watch out for you so that others don't come in to attack you, to defeat you, to take you away. Inside, I want you to get rid of all of those who would talk a different language, who would try to draw you away from me. I'm filled with wrath against them. I don't want you to join in with them. And so the big phrase in Deuteronomy is remember and do not forget. Remember and do not forget. And so I need to tell you right now about my remember story. Okay? I don't know, Dale, if you remember this one or not, but late in September one year, we went out to Grandpa Trapp's cottage on Lake Erie. Grandpa had died already. It's probably the late 50s or very early 60s. And if you know anything about lakes, the shallower the lake, the lower the waves. So you'll have bigger waves on Lake Superior than you will on Lake Erie. Lake Erie at its deepest point is about 150 feet. What is it, 1,100 feet or something like that for Superior? So you'll just get bigger waves crashing. And so we'd have this little bit of lapping water that would come in most of the time. Came out this day on a Sunday in late September, and the waves were great. They're about, I don't know, high enough that I could dive into them and really enjoy it. Well, I didn't have my suit with me, but my cousin Glenn said, well, you could borrow Robert's suit. He's not here. And so we went swimming. Do you remember, did you go that day, Dale?
Can't recall.
Okay. Well, at Aunt Ann and Uncle Rich's 50th anniversary, I said to Glenn, do you remember that day? And Glenn lived out at the cottage every summer. They finally built their own cottage next door. And so he was on that lake a lot. He said, yeah, it was a great day. The waves were really great, weren't they? Well, you don't want great waves if you're a skier. Then the flatter the water, the better it is. But that was a great day in the fall. So we can remember that way. Remember something from the past that was just a kind of a nice experience. I do know that Dale will remember this day, August 15th, 1970. That's the day Kathy and I got married. Now, I remember that there was it was about 103, 104 degrees, typical Kansas City in August. That's what she misses so much. She really does.
You're sweating in more ways than one.
Oh my. And I remember that we had a bad storm that came up, a real bad electrical storm, knocked the power out. Took, 20, 25 minutes. We had a reception for the congregation downstairs. That's where I vicared. And then the immediate family went for dinner somewhere nearby in Kansas City. And I remember my brothers-in-law bombing me with rice. We parked the car on the other half of the garage where the neighbor was, and they knew that, and bombing us with rice as we were leaving to go on our honeymoon. But I remember that day differently than I remember going swimming in Lake Erie. Because that day, for me, continues to have an impact. I'm still married. That relationship goes on. We've had children, we have grandchildren, and even if my wife were not alive, there are still many things about my life that have been lived out because of this. My days about swimming in Lake Erie, that was just kind of a moment. When God says remember, He doesn't mean just look through the picture books and think of the good old days. He says realize that what I'm setting in motion here is ongoing. So the Hebrew word for remember is zakar. Know the word Zachary? Zechariah is connected with that. And the word zakar is also the word for the male of the species. That root word, which means you are continued through your descendants. So even people who are not going to think about living forever, we don't have that here yet, we don't have it talked about, they're going to be remembered through their family. And so that whole thing is something that was set in motion that is continuing. So if my kids say, and I say, did you put the trash out like I asked you to? No, I forgot. No, they didn't. They didn't forget. They didn't choose to make it important enough that they did it. It wasn't a big enough deal. And so, versus something that is set in motion and is ongoing, that's what Deuteronomy is. It says, I'm bringing you into this land. There are people in the land who have other ways of thinking, but I'm the Lord your God who is giving you this place to live. Here are some things that are not to happen in this land. Here are some things that are to happen in the land. Here's how I'm binding myself. Here's how I call you to obey me. But not obey in the sense of God's rules, but in the sense of what He has set in motion, where He says, live within that framework. All right? It's not God's rules, and then you're going to get across the Jordan. He says, I'm bringing you across. The water's going to part. they're going to go in the land. That's not going to be the issue. But once they get in there, how will they keep in mind something's already happening? And because of what's already happening, here's how we live within the framework of it. So if it says don't have any wizards or any people with their tarot cards or their crystal balls or something, God says that's not the way it works here. Don't bring that in. Don't bring in any kinds of infections, ways that people have come up with after the fall and the sin to say here's how life works. The passage in Isaiah says when people get absolutely beyond their ability to know how to control anything and they're scared silly, that's when they turn to the wizards and the demons and the crystal ball gazers and the palm readers and all that kind of stuff. That says they're scared silly, they have no idea, they'll grab at anything. He says, you don't need to because I'm with you. And thus, the relationship is not just them doing what God says and then he'll bless them. And so I see the word if.